Yeah.
Oh.
No, we admit them. I'm admitting everybody. I want people here. What the heck? There we have it. We have, okay, we got 10 people. Okay, everybody, we're getting ready to just to talk about Berkeley and about
and we have 2 on YouTube.
Get rid of this. Yeah. Gonna get rid of that. We're gonna give it 1 minute. I'm gonna be quiet for a moment, and then I'm gonna present. Don't hit anything. Yes.
Yeah, that camera is not currently.
Okay, what's the camera that's gonna have him?
Yeah, that one.
Okay. Do you want to? Are you gonna sit or stand?
I'm gonna stand probably. It's easier.
Okay. Can you do that? I want you to show me that you can show him standing. Okay. Do you want something to stand your computer on?
No, I'm fine. I'm just like, it's just more normal to stand than to sit.
I think so. I think so. So you can sit down while you're. Oh, okay. Well, because we're there, it's such an intimate group here. I'm going to just sit myself. And okay, we now have more people coming online. This is good. And how do we let this person in? Can you, can you let that person in, please? I don't seem to do it right now. Oh, why am I not able to? Thank you. Yeah, I should be, but who knows? I know I want to be. All right. We're gonna like get rid of this bar somehow. How do I get rid of this bar? I don't.
Ted, your slides look great to me. I don't see a bar.
Okay, perfect. It's just my bar. I'm barred. And when somebody makes the board doorbell, just gonna run down together. Okay. All right. Welcome to Berkeley, everyone. This is a monthly
program that we run, and we've been running it since 1989. And why am I not going forward? Okay. And we are Berkeley. We are a special interest group that's part of the ACM's SIG Chi community. There's 75,000 members in the ACM. We've been running Berkeley since 1989. Only 2 times have we missed a month's talk. One was 9/11 and the other was March of 2020. Other than that, every month without fail, January through December, everything. This is December, which is a difficult time maybe for people. We have these talks, and and we've just recently gone back to in person. It's been a little harder to get people to come in after COVID than it used to be, so we're sad about that. But it is a really vibrant set of speakers we've had. We've had everyone in the last 2 years, from Don Norman to Ben Schneiderman to Greg Vanderheiden. You know all these people, don't you, Eric? And more. Everybody you can think of has spoken here, and it's really a lot of fun. In fact, one of the things that I'm doing right now is we're putting up over 100 talks that have happened at Berkeley that weren't up, and that's going to happen in the next couple months. That we're going to have a whole bunch of talks that never have been seen before. So that's kind of exciting, and they go back. There's some of these people aren't even live anymore. So it's a great organization. Join if you'd like. That pays for our IT and our and if we buy some food sometimes. And if you guys were here, you would have gotten a free meal tonight. It's not extravagant, but it's lovely. And thank you, Nikki, so much for doing that. We get a newsletter. We have Birds of a Feather meetings. And the Birds of a Feather meetings can be anything that you want to design. I'm looking for somebody to run one about Kai tools always, but
right now Edwin Lee is running one that's about careers in Kai, and he also has a weekly hangout for people that are thinking about careers in Chi. I think it's a very exciting thing. I also want to celebrate Melissa Aguirre, who's our celebrator, our finance, what do you call it, treasurer, and Nikki, who's been doing a lot of work to keep the things running too. Steve Williams has done just always is doing yeoman's work. He helps get these meetings started, but he built the website and keeps things running in many, many ways. And Marianne Ray. Anyway, please join this group. On the first Thursday of every month, we have a get-together at basically 7:30. And what we do is we kind of check in and see how everybody's doing. And then we talk about plans for Bay Chi. Okay, so tonight we've got Eric Paulos, and he's just an adventurer and an explorer of a Chi sort of way, I think professor of electrical engineering and computer science. I mean, he does get his hands dirty, and he's got this swarm lab, and he's going to tell us about his work. And you've seen his him online on the announcement for this thing. And I think that I don't want to take too much time talking about what he's going to talk about, but he's got this very exciting sounding title, plastic dynamism, whatever the heck that is. It's obviously not static. And in that regard, I'm sure there's a lot to say. Typically what we do is we have you speak for 50 minutes or something, and then we open it up, and the discussion often is the highlight of the evening for many of the speakers, and certainly I enjoy that. So without further ado, Eric, please join us, full professor from Berkeley, here for our pleasure.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Oh yeah, we're gonna do. I mean, if people want to figure out how to do questions in between, without further ado, there'll be a small ado while we switch some cables around, but then there will be not much ado. No, because I have to just double check. I can just have this running. I think it's gonna be fine, but just hitting some things.
And you can start sharing.
Yes, good. Okay, apologies for what should be a minimal delay. I assume someone will yell at me if they can't hear me. And do we hear audio like this background playing again? Is that running?
Yes.
But can we hear
It
it on the
is, and
Zoom?
we hear it on Zoom as well.
Okay, that's just my little audio test, so I appreciate that. Okay.
And Steve, I want you to remind me that the recording's working perfectly, right?
Yeah, I think there's a little thing flashing that seems to be showing it's recording, so it is being documented.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Ted, for having me out. It's been I was trying to figure out when I first met you, and I can't quite. But it was at the Media Lab a million years ago, probably. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and also to the other lab folks, it's just great to have them, support this. And this is such a great venue. People should know about this more. Okay. So. We're going to just launch in. I'm going to have a couple stories for you, and then we'll talk about some research, and we can have dialogue along the way if someone figures out things interrupt or do something that feels like an interruption, and online someone will say, hey, there's someone asking something. But first, let me try to address one of the things Ted brought up, this whole what is this plastic dynamism? So this is not what I mean.
Plastics.
Okay, so I realize many people don't get this reference, so I have to tell you what this is. The scene from The Graduate, obviously, where he's talking about going into this plastic physics. So plastics is not the concept of that material. What I'm trying to talk about is basically bring in this idea from the futurists when they talked about their idea of plastic dynamism was art and things that captured movement and this tension between motion and the static. So things that kind of capture no movement and the essence of kind of planned or captured movement. And there's a long history of this. And I like this dichotomy of this tension between these two states. And there's a lot written about it. This is what was written at the time. This is not my writing. Between real and ideal forms, between new forms and traditional forms, we've discovered a form which is variable, evolutionary, and quite different from any other concepts which have existed up till now. We have discovered form in movement and the movement of form. Only through this dual conception of form can we give a hint of plastic life in our work without having extracted and removed it from its living environment, which would mean arresting its motion. So I apologize for reading this whole thing, but I know you're thinking, wait, I thought this was a Chi talk. Why am I not seeing circuits? And I don't see like a Venn diagram, and I don't see user testing. This is going to be a little bit of a different walk through this landscape. And so hopefully you can kind of just start to detox, and we're going to have a different
I'm going to have
conversation.
to break in. So when I think of plastic, I think of formable. I think of changeable. I think of it. So that I hope is maybe what I do. I got the right idea?
Yeah, no, I mean plastic as this deformable, right?
Yeah.
Through temperature change or some kind of
Yeah.
change. And I'm not everything will have this, but this is a concept that I'm wrestling with that I like as this kind of idea of tension. I'm also going to put up this quote here, and just think if this resonates with you. Imagine something never done before by a method never before used, whose outcome is unforeseen. And probably for most of you, certainly myself, this is what we do every day. We try to imagine things, try to invent things, we try to think of new outcomes. What struck me was this was not from particularly a scientist or engineer. This is actually a quote from Alan Capro, who's a well-known artist that brought us the happenings and basically was probably one of the first new media artists to think about that space again between where is the audience and where is the kind of performance. And I would say, I know this sounds like we're having an art talk, and I'm sorry, we are having an art talk, but also in the world of human-computer interaction, we're often at this tension of where is the interaction, where is the person, where is the context. And so you'll find in the work and the way I interrogate things, there's a lot of cross-pollination of those landscapes and disciplines. I've had the fortune, I've been very fortunate to work with a huge number of just really talented students. This is just like a wide swath of a bunch of different projects over, several decades of work. I run this group called Hybrid Ecologies. And for me, hybrid, I'm pulling in another quote here from Marshall McLuhan, this hybrid or the meeting of two media is a moment of truth and revelation from which new form is born. And again, I think this is a really important part of it. It could be hybrid in terms of disciplines or gender or culture or material or economies, or all kinds of different hybrid ways of thinking are important. The ecologies is just this idea of this scientific analysis and study of interactions among organisms and their environment, such as the interactions organisms have with each other and with their abiotic environment. Okay, so hopefully that's just some terminology to set up things. This is the slide that just is the cheat sheet to how I think I've done research over the years. Basically identify some core metaphor in a field, recognize what the metaphor excludes or marginalizes. Could be an interaction, it could be a community, it could be some kind of texture, it could be so many different things. Invert the metaphor to bring that marginalized experience to the center. And obviously I like to build things and do physical things and embody that inversion. So let me try to give you, I'll give you 5 little vignettes. These are like older projects. They span multiple years. I'm going to try to summarize them in just a couple minutes each. All right, here we go. And some of them go way back. They go back because I have hair in the picture. This one, I have hair in the picture. This is a project from quite some time ago, maybe 30 years ago. Early internet telepresence. Basically, the idea, again, was thinking about telepresence wasn't new, but it was using essentially trained operators. It was quite expensive, and the application was remote repair and inspection. The idea is, what if we inverted that? It was low cost, there were untrained operators, and the application was socially hanging out. And I did a bunch of different experiments with these, and my advisor at the time, John Canny. So we did these kind of blimps that would fly around. I want to remind people this is before Wi-Fi, this is before Arduinos, this is before many other things. So yes, you can now buy this on an in-flight magazine for like $20, and my whole thesis is like a 99-cent app. But that's how it should be, I think. But also we built these ground-based props, we called them, for personal roving presence devices. And a lot of different experiences. Again, I don't want to go into like it's a thesis work, so it's got lots of things. And of course, you recognize it. This all came out of work from Berkeley many decades ago, and it kind of spawned this whole kind of idea. In fact, I was looking through, here's some pictures just pulled straight out of my thesis. Basically, hey, maybe you'd use it as a remote kind of expert. You could do it socially, hanging out on, that's the streets of Telegraph, getting tarot cards read. And then we prototyped a tablet experience. These tablets didn't exist at the time. And then, of course, this is, not even, something like 20 years later, you kind of have that, and you have more now. What I want to get at, the main thing I want to take away is, yes, we could talk about the technical challenges, things about networking. There's things about gaze, posture, like human-robot interaction. I'm going to focus on one of the inspirations, which was an artist. So Andy Warhol, these silver clouds, you can go experience this in Pittsburgh if you go to the Andy Warhol Museum, and it's about kind of this embodiment. And also Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz, who hooked up as artists the first video feed with audio directly from basically between New York and between New York and LA. And then in this installation, basically, people could talk across the distance. This is basically FaceTime. We can do this now for free, but this was a really big deal at the time. Now, I also want to talk about, you saw that picture of the robot. We were also thinking about how the robot could be a person. Maybe that would be the ultimate robot. You control another person. And we did this project. I did this collaboratively with Ken Goldberg and Judith Donna. And we essentially had sort of a special equipment, and someone would wear it. You could tell them, hey, go up to that person and ask them how much the oranges are. Buy the orange and bring it home, or all these different things you could do, and you could actually control someone at a distance. Obviously, we have things like TaskRabbit, and there's like Periscope and FaceTime Live, and now there's even more where you can watch Twitch, and you're just controlling people and watching people remotely. We did, if you think about it, there's this idea of if you remember, Cyrano de Bergerac did this. And in fact, there was a social psychologist, Stanley Milgram. Milgram will come up a couple of times in this talk, I should warn you. Same Stanley Milgram that did the obedience to authority experiments. He postulated it would be very interesting to actually do this as well through a feed, but he did this decades before in the 70s. In fact, this is an installation of him doing a setup of how you would control this, and you could actually send commands to people, and people wouldn't be able to tell that there's a person speaking through them. So a lot of interesting things about ethics and kind of odd configurations. What I want to tell you is, and there'll be little segues in this talk, is that Milgram actually put forth this idea as a National Science Foundation grant, which was steadfastly denied as a very, very stupid idea. In fact, I'm going to share the reviews with you because I got them. This is one of the weakest proposals. There's a complete lack of new theories. I cannot imagine what the contribution of the study could possibly be, and on and on. So this is maybe speaking to people that have gotten any kind of reviews or people that submitted grants. People don't know what they're doing. This was so ahead of its time, they couldn't see that it would be really interesting to explore voice and then even video at a distance, and that could be really compelling. All right.
Wow.
End of rant. Story 2. So another thing that I was interested in was this idea of familiar strangers. And this was a project I did with Elizabeth Goodman. And familiar strangers are people that are familiar to you. You see them every day, but they're strangers. You don't actually interact with them. It's that woman on the bus that's always reading the newspaper. It's that kid that skateboards by your house. It's these people that actually make up an important part of the urban landscape. And we basically explored how using, again, you can tell by the picture how old this technology is. This is an old Nokia phone, and there were no app stores, so we programmed this in, I don't even want to get into Symbian and other stories, but basically we used Bluetooth as a local beacon to try to figure out who were the people you were passing by and who were these familiar strangers. And we tried to have visualizations of who they were. And also, if I was in a place, maybe, for example, the coffee cup showed people that I'd been at a cafe with. I don't know who they are. I can't identify them. We explicitly limited it. We didn't want to have ways to chat with them and like them and follow them. This was just a kind of experience around your urban environment. There's different visualizations of that. And a lot of it got pulled into other things. It's actually the same technology that the COVID contact tracing uses. They have many layers of kind of sort of protection so people don't know. It's anonymized, basically. And other folks, I know these are older technologies, but things like Foursquare and then things that came after that that had ways for tracking who's nearby. A lot of dating apps do this now. Now, again, I don't want to talk about all the technology. I do want to say it was fairly novel at the time because people were all trying to build things around massively sharing the most information possible. And we were saying, maybe you don't want to do that. Again, here's our friend, Stanley Milgram, again, doing these experiments in the 70s. This was him looking at familiar strangers in a platform outside the Bronx, and he took pictures. He went back 2 weeks later, showed people these pictures, said, who do you recognize? There's a bunch of studies on this. There's people called sociometric stars that people basically repeatedly identify. We reperformed these experiments in Berkeley and got very similar numbers from Milgram. We thought it would change over time. What I want to kind of pull on is, again, the inspiration from this was not a computer scientist. It was basically a social psychologist and artist. So people like Vito Acconci, this thing called Following Piece. This is a piece that you can actually perform yourself. You find a stranger in public and you follow them until they go into a private space. I will not bail you out of jail if you do this particular performance, but you can do this. A really provocative artist. I got to meet Vito Acconci shortly before he passed away, but also artists like Sophie Calle, who looked at the collections of things that strangers leave behind. And if you think about it, we do this as a human species. We look at things, we create narratives about, here's a comb or a brush or somebody left behind a scrap of paper. I know, again, you're like, I thought this was going to be an HCI talk about technology. I want to pull your attention into like other observational cues around basically everyday life and how sometimes we look to draw inspiration for research projects. Story 3. So after I was done at Berkeley, I ended up at Intel Research. They had these lablets at a number of research associated with campuses at Carnegie Mellon, at University of Washington, Berkeley, and also in the UK with Cambridge. At Berkeley, we were working a lot with these small little devices. Again, this is pre-Arduino and all these things. These are small little motes. They were interesting because people were trying to study low-cost networking and how to basically deliver different kinds of low-power network topologies, do environmental sensing. There's a lot of really cool things to do with this. One thing that I pulled this aside and said, well, we could just wear this maybe, and we could put some sensors on it. And we did this project, and these are the slides from back then, so it's got gratuitous Intel logoage. But the idea is you could tap on this wristwatch form factor, and it would transmit a sort of vibratory tap remotely. And then you could also swipe it, and it would either heat up or cool down. Now, these are shot at local venues, Farley's Cafe here. And then you could also hold down on it, and it would send your heartbeat. Now, this is a mock-up, but we actually built working prototypes of this. They're just very clumsy. One's still in my office and still functions to this day, which is surprising. Point of this is I did this project. We published this. People said, stop this stupid project. Nobody ever wants this. Don't do this. This is a really, really bad idea. No one will ever want this or make this. Okay, then this happened. So I didn't have anything to do with this. It wasn't like I was hanging out with Johnny Ives and he said, okay, let's do this cool project. But it was clear there was going to be an interesting new language that would develop around these sensations. And so, yes, of course.
So Jokic Dave, he did a project that was published where he had people be able to put a heartbeat, they touch on the screen on your lover's screen. And literally the people that had that going had relationships lasting longer than alt date.
I know. Look at stuff at Alt Chi because there's some cool things in there as well. I remember there was like a hug jacket, all these kind of things.
You know, super validating of this couple people.
Okay. Again, the takeaway is we could talk about the technologies and different things. Is I really was drawn, again, another artist I admire, John Baldessari, passed away a couple years ago. He says the best way to make art is to intrigue and be a bit seductive. You just say, here's this and this, you figure it out. And to me, it's sometimes this is what happens is we feel like we have to look at, this is what in Chi or in HCI we often say, go out and observe the problem. People are missing the bus. Go design some tool that helps them make the bus on time. Great. Measure your success. 74% or more people got the bus. I'm very excited. I'm not saying those are bad projects, but sometimes not everything has to complete the narrative, and you can open it up and let people lean in and start to have imagine what these things are. Now, we don't want this for an aircraft flight controller, so we fine. But a lot of these things, I think you can leave it a little open-ended and let people create their own narratives. And I like the way John talks about this. All right. Story 4. All right. So we were doing a lot of things with mobile devices, and we realized that what these were not mobile phones. They were really supercomputer radio stations with sensors. I mean, they had a very different kind of function. And so we and lots of others, I'm not saying it was the only people doing this, but we started to attach different kinds of sensors. This is some early work we did with air quality sensors, and we tried to there's probably about 24 projects in this space I did with a number of different students. Some of them took the form of things we gave to communities. Some of them were apps. Some of them were these kind of creating spectacles in public. Some of them were wearables, all kinds of different things. We built some of our own technologies just because there was nothing that available at this time that was very high cost. We also looked at other kinds of landscapes with toys. So how kids, again, would create narratives if they had basically toys that altered the way they look. There's a little expressive face on these devices, and it also vibrated based on changes in water quality, changes in air quality, changes in soil kind of composition. And again, not supposed to be just flash a red light, say danger, but let them just explore their world with a different lens. We also very early on worked with the EPA to really create the first ever kind of on-the-go real-time air quality readings that you could get through, yes, this is a text messaging service. That's what was available at the time. And now, of course, all of us, when we open our mobile devices, we have this. Similarly, we looked at attaching and measuring these air quality when you moved around on your phone. And then, of course, the EPA is now using this. You can buy things for your home. We saw a lot of this at the time. We were interested in exploring how people would socialize around it, how they would feel about sharing, how they would have a believability about that. Even here in San Francisco, I got to work with the city and attach air quality sensors to all of the street sweepers that moved around. And so almost every day we could collect air quality all over the city. There are challenges to that, and there's also really interesting things around using municipal vehicles that move around. We figured out that you are basically very boring. You don't move around much. People like postal workers, delivery folks, things that really move around. But now there's a lot of that. Okay. And again, I want to focus back on an inspirational figure that I find in this area, Rachel Carson, who wrote The Silent Spring. And she says, the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe, the less taste we will have for its destruction. And so a lot of this is just thinking like, again, I think all of us have this big calling about the environment and how can we, there's one thing to just really try to be in your face about it, but also sometimes it's just educating and letting little experiences seep in and having people come to the realization of where they want to make decisions. All right. Last, number 5 of these little vignettes, and I'll talk about some other things. Energy. Okay, so you're probably plugged in someplace. I have my laptop plugged in. Maybe you're charging your phone. I want you to think about energy in a different way. And this is some work I did with James Pierce, where the idea was energy as an actual material. So something that has a material property. So it might have, well, I'll give you a thought experiment. So imagine a loved one. This was actually my son many years ago. He's now at off in college, so he would be embarrassed that I'm showing this picture. But imagine a loved one that goes out, is on a swing, and generates some electricity, little power, and then brings it back to you and gives it to you, and then you power a light. And my question is that somehow different than just plugging into the wall? And I claim that it is. I mean, here's something that's handmade. It's given to you with a kind of love. It's from a loved one, and it probably has some material like from the swing. You can almost think about the swinging motion. So it has these different kinds of auras to it. And I'll come back to that. But often when we're talking about energy, people are, how do we basically think about consumption and reducing it? And the conversation here, kind of from a designerly standpoint, was maybe there's new ways to collect it or keep it or share it. Just other kinds of interactions that might be interesting to explore beyond just, hey, everyone's got to stop using as much electricity. And we did some experiments around there. We made these things called energy mementos. They were small little devices that captured tiny bits of energy. You could shake them and turn this crank. Again, another experiment I would ask you is, imagine turning a hand crank with your grandfather and you had some energy. Would you put that on the mantle, like here's like the energy from your grandfather that we made together or something? So this idea of kind of little bits of energy, and people said, this is like a cute little project, but lots of little bits of energy does not an energy crisis solve. And that's fine. The project was not supposed to say that this is the exact solution, but I'm interested in opening up new conversations. We also took this to Ars Electronica. I did a project called Energy Parasites. These were intentionally kind of very handcrafted, just like objects, but they're similar in that they capture little bits of energy and they're functional. And the idea was, this is about stealing energy, quite literally. So you could attach these to public vehicles. So you see here in the upper left, you could attach it to a tram, and it would basically steal that energy. You could just pull it off. It had a magnet. There's also ones where you could attach it for a car to catch the headlights, to get some photovoltaic. You could basically attach it to a fountain to steal some kind of water that's coming from a pump, or even you see an escalator there. So none of these are free. You're stealing the energy, and it's lots of little bits of energy, but I would claim it makes a new conversation about where are these little energy bits coming out of it? How do you steal them? And where are the opportunities for exploring that? And then again, cute project doesn't make any sense, but that's exactly what happened. We now have lots of devices, mobile phones from many companies, where you can basically share your energy. And the thinking was like, would you want to leave a little bit of energy when you get off the bus or off of BART or something else? So these little bits of energy that you might want to share and move around. And we also thought about how you might charge your devices and they would capture a little bit more of this materiality. Where is it just like, 20%, or is it, percentage breakdown of solar or hydroelectric, things like that? We wrote about this and published this work. And then I think many people know, Apple actually a couple of years ago turned on a feature in some of the other mobile phone operators where you can actually get that lens into where the charge is coming from in terms of clean and dirty energy in some sense. And again, I feel like this draws from Walter Benjamin, who talks about this idea of, art in the age of mechanical reproduction. He talks about things having an aura because they had that true experience. This was obviously the argument was you can just take photographs now and that'll just end artwork because we can just keep replicating them. But there's something about that authenticity. He says, the authenticity of a thing is the essence of all that is transmissible from its beginning, ranging from its substantive duration, its testimony to the history which it has experienced. And I'd say there's probably things in your own room, office that are just little tiny, hey, that's the little pen that my friend gave me, or the bottle that we had that drink out of, or a little knickknack. Things have some experience and you don't get rid of them because they have that history. So there's another strategy to have things embed this aura into them. I'll talk about another kind of design tactic, and I apologize. I'm just kind of going through a bunch of projects, hoping that a couple will land in your brain. Because if I try to hit on one for like 20 minutes, it'll be like, I think, too intense. So hopefully some of these will match, and then I'm happy to have a
I
discussion.
kind of want to make a comment on that last one. I'm thinking of the word patina. You know, a lot of things, when you see old things sitting around, you can see what they've done. Stairs is the typical one. And I think that's a really fun thing to look at because it kind of captures a little bit of what I think of when I hear you talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, there's things, a little mark on your desk or on the floor. I know there's like a weird mark on the floor at my house, and I know that was the day my kids were pushing something when they were little kids, pushing something down. I never got that mark out, but it's like, it tells a story, it has meaning. So not everything has to be this polished, perfect design like a lot of the high tech that we get. There's value in thinking through things that have a patina or some kind of aura. So this is a concept, again, that I worked with James Pierce on, the idea of counterfunctional design. And I'm going to say this sentence, and it's going to be confusing, and then I'm going to give you an example, and hopefully it makes sense. So counterfunctional design is a thing that counters some of its essential functionality while retaining familiarity as essentially that thing. Okay, that sounds confusing. So I'll give you an example, because the example we used was to think about a camera. So if you think about what a camera does, it essentially is like capturing photons and it's recording them. Okay, so what do you do with the camera? You can capture lots of pictures, you can view lots of pictures, you can share them, you can maybe manipulate them, you can, do lots of different things. But we said, what if we counter some essential functionality? So we set up and did we did a couple different designs. Again, this is some work from like 10 years ago, but the idea was cameras that you could only view the pictures if you're around the same people again. Cameras that you could only, you had to basically shatter them with a hammer to get the pictures out. There were all these different constraints. I want to point to one of them that was in here. We designed this thing called the prompt cam, and this is from the paper. This is the prompt camera. You cannot take pictures whenever you want. You can only take pictures when it lights up, prompting you to take a picture, and it would let you take a picture through multiple viewpoints. So we're used to being able to take a picture all the time, but there was this preciousness. Again, this design works with constraints. So the constraint was, now is the moment. Like, let's take this picture. The window closes, you can't take it. Again, people said, stupid idea. People want more functionality. Don't do this. People, why? Huge maximum sharing. But then again, for those that know, that's exactly what Be Real is, which is a pretty popular social media sharing tool. It prompts you. You can take a picture only then. There's a 2-minute window, and it's shared. It's supposed to be kind of spontaneity and try to remove that posing and performative nature. And we saw that, and we knew that was going to be something that would be a draw. Again, I'm going to pull up Marshall McLuhan. He says, artists show us how to ride with the punch rather than taking a knockout on the chin. This idea that artists, when we look at them, they kind of help guide us through some of the complexities and some of the things that seem very kind of overwhelming as interactions, as technologies, as human experiences. And I try and be drawn to this. Now, this got me thinking about some other work that has gone on decades before that artists have really originated, and then later has become really established as things we use nowadays. So one of them is the Aspen movie map. So Andy Lippman, actually Michael Namork was part of this too. And I don't think you were part of this, but a lot of people that we know were part of it. Yeah, exactly. So a long list of folks. Rebecca Allen, I think, Walter Bender, I mean, whatever. There's a bunch of people. Here it is. It's fascinating. You can basically wander around the city of Aspen, Colorado. It's on a laser video disc. So I know people are now Googling what's a laser video disc. And it was a touch screen. Now, when they did this, it looks a lot like this kind of thing, right? So now, they're 30 years apart. Now, the Aspen movie map won an award, actually. It won what's called a Golden Fleece Award. So this is an award given out by Congress as the most egregious waste of taxpayer money. So you can go, the congressional records show that they said, Aspen movie map, stop this stupid, dumb project. This is a bad idea. And then we have this other thing. I'm not claiming we were going to get Google Street View anyway. It's not as if it was not going to happen. But again, I want to point out often people can't see the value. They could not tell what the value of wandering around a city could possibly be. And I asked Michael to send us a picture. This is the setup they use. So very similar. Very similar. Yeah. Good vehicle. I'd like to get that back. Now, this also I'm gonna invoke because I went in and these archives, but even our friend Stanley Milgram wrote about this idea. He called it the urban visual simulator, and he said this urban eye. He had a very different way. We need to build this. He was going to use microfiche, and you could move around, and it was really interactive. He actually wrote a grant, and guess what? Did not get funded. It's told it's a very bad idea. So even too early, 1970s, he had the same idea of how you would actually create this. I'll give you 2 or 3 more. Here's one. Myron Kruger, just wildly misunderstood computer scientist and artist. People could not figure out what he's doing. They said, this isn't computer science. We don't understand what you're doing. But clearly he was interested in the body and gesture and movement and all these things that we do now with Microsoft Connect and Sony iToy and on and on and on. But basically, an artist that they couldn't, if you just looked at his work in 1974, you could have brought the whole field forward so quickly. But really people said, I don't get what that is. We don't want to talk about that. Let's work on
And yet I want to say
okay.
that this is one of the most influential people of his time. He made Media Space. He wrote a book about this. Be aware of Myron Kruger. I mean, I think he's still alive and maybe even doing it. I mean, it was racks of 19-inch racks to the ceiling. This was hard work to do at that time.
Yeah, really hard to do. It's amazing. A little more recent, and I'm just going to invoke the word Twitter because I don't want to talk about X. So we're in the Twitter world for a couple minutes. So Twitter was actually started as an art project by the Institute for Applied Autonomy. Basically, some folks went out and they needed a lightweight messaging tool to communicate during the 2004 Democratic National Convention. They built this tool, they used it. It was an activist tool to help with protests. And after that, they had no job. They came here to San Francisco. There was this guy, Jack Dorsey, who was working on a music application. They said, don't do that. You should do this kind of text lightweight tool with some character limits. And hence we got Twitter. And so again, it's like this long story of things that start off as these provocative art pieces and become part of our culture. We can have a separate debate about Twitter and X and social media, but at least some of this origin is interesting to look at. I'm going to throw in a little flair from my past. So I got a chance to work with this amazing group, Survival Research Labs, for a number of years. And they created this shockwave vortex cannon. The concept was known at the time, but they created this effect for like large scale audiences where you could actually felt like you were being hit with a giant pillow. And it was several decades later, we saw kind of researchers start to explore this. Like Disney Research made this really beautiful interactive piece where you could feel things as they moved through the air. They could create these really compelling experiences. All right, now, this whole idea of like bringing these disciplines together, folks like another artist I'll bring in is Jean Tangley. He did this piece called Homage to New York. It was a gigantic sculpture that kind of destroyed itself over time at the MoMA. But he worked with Billy Kluver, who was basically an engineer at Bell Labs, and he worked with Rauschenberg and other folks. Billy Kluver was really the kind of, this was during the time of experiments in art and technology, and he worked with Merce Cunningham, he worked with John Cage, he worked with Warhol, he worked with Jasper Johns, and go Bears. He was a PhD from UC Berkeley, so there you go, right on. Okay, but again, I like this idea, and I think this is something that HCI does so great, is working with multiple disciplines. This clashing point of 2 subjects, of 2 disciplines, of 2 cultures, of 2 galaxies ought to produce creative chances. This is what C.P. Snow writes about. And there's so many examples. This is the one that always gets used. So before someone goes, oh, why didn't you show this one? Yes, folks like, you have Steve Jobs as this kind of humanist and Steve Wozniak as this engineer, and they sort of created this experience. Maybe Hugh has different visions of some of these early days. I also love Lillian Schwartz, who's just amazing. She also worked at the time of experiments in art and technology, but she was a pioneer in kind of computer music and visuals. If you ever get a chance to see some of her work, she could really look at the technology as a new material and really took it and unpacked it and created essentially a new artistic medium from it. Jerry Lawson is this extremely creative, talented individual that basically realized that for games, you would want to have separate kind of packages. And so he's the one that brought us the early video game cartridges. So the first cartridges for video games, you would buy your console and then you buy individual games to play. You have Jerry Larson to thank for that. I mean, Jerry Lawson, he basically brought that whole concept. So I got a chance to meet Virgil Abloh before he passed away, unfortunately. Virgil Abloh, he was at the end, he was basically running the Louis Vuitton menswear line. Before that, he's obviously known for Off-White, far more fashion sense than myself. But one thing to know about Virgil is he's actually a civil engineer and an architect. So he has 2 degrees. So he gets this kind of juxtaposition of science, technology with art and architecture. My conversation with him, he said, I get it. Like, we're trying to do fashion, but fashion reflects the culture of the time. And the culture right now is really technology. I want to understand how to bring that material into a playful experience for people. They were doing some things with some of their clothing lines and stuff, but it's fun to interact with them. Now, I would say for myself, I got to have this really precious experience with this group that I mentioned before, Survival Research Labs, that some people here may have also been a part of. So the idea is that I think this brought together a really interesting eclectic group of like just creative folks from so many different disciplines, art, engineering, architecture, just across the spectrum. And for me, it was formative. I'll just show you a brief video clip of what these performances look like. And for those of you who've probably never seen one of these, this is not Robot Wars. This is basically, there's a very loose script of a kind of performance, but I would best describe it as what maybe machines want to do when we're not around, right? So like we kind of tell them, drive here and do this, but maybe they have other things they would like. This show is actually in 1994 on Pier 7, not far from here. I'll just kind of let it play for a few seconds to get a sense of what these look like. This show? You like this show? Yeah, I know. I should have told Cal to come over. Yeah, his friends with Cal. Cal's probably, well, I know what machine. Now, I got a chance to also think through how some of these machines, I remember I was doing robotics and telepresence, but how there might be ethics around people controlling lethal weaponry at a distance. And we did a number of experiments where we would let people control things over the internet. These are some of the first times this happened. And then also putting them on the streets of San Francisco. So funny because now there's some kind of police record that, God, I don't know. We also worked with the idea of kind of epistemology and authenticity online, where we allowed people to come into a remote laboratory and control a robot to burn and perform experiments on a purported pair of $100 bills. This is a project called Legal Tender. There's a lot of, this was shown at SIGGRAPH and also at some other venues. But the idea is if you gave up your anonymity and you perform these experiments and you were doing this on a real bill, in fact, that is a federal crime. And so you're committing a criminal act over a distance on the internet. And we were sort of keeping track of these things. So we showed this project several times. Actually, recently showed it. Cal actually helped set us up a show here in San Francisco. Recently, we showed this. But this was definitely about this idea of like obliterating things. I'm going to mention two other side projects and then pivot back to some kind of research. But I also worked in forming this group called the Experimental Action Unit. And two formative things that happened during that time were I wanted to create my own basically kind of pulse technology where I could basically knock out any electronics from a distance. So this is basically electronic design that will create an electromagnetic pulse. The problem is trying to document this because it'll knock out a video camera. So you have to stand very far back. It really works. But the idea was to have your own information bomb, that you could create this technology-free zone. It was overly aggressive, but if you think about, we set aside national parks right now for kind of having a time away from the city. In the future, this is a little dystopian, but maybe we create these technology-free zones and we have to forcefully eject all the technology from it. And I was also trying to confront Steve Mann about some like wearable stuff. I was doing a number of things.
He needs to be.
He knows. Another project was called Dispersion. This was both of these were things, this was at Ars Electronica a number of years ago, but this was essentially a very kind of playful, fun laboratory where you could create essentially lethal pathogens. I know, you're like, what the heck were you doing? This is pre-9/11. Both of these existed before 9/11. I probably could not show them now. But essentially, it would mix up something and you would actually get it dispensed to you. But it was, you could see the laboratory there. I'll leave it at that. I'll skip this too. I do want to say something, a last point about this survival research labs, because I think there's something about the culture and the people that are very compelling, because to me it was formative. There's of course these machines and things that are going on, but I was interested in the people. And this is like a picture of a bar not far from here that we used to go to. It's at 17th and Cap Street. I don't think it's there anymore, but we all gathered recently about a year ago to all get together. And I can tell you so much creativity and ideas came from that in-person interaction. And I love the online experience. I'm not a Luddite, but there's something about that in-person experience that is missing from some of these things. Yeah. And I'm also I'm a little bit saddened because our dear friend, Amy Miller is right here. She just passed away from cancer just a couple weeks ago. And so very sad that that's happened. So kind of have her in my memory here. Okay. This individual, you probably know, this is the kind of, I think once you get indoctrinated into HCI, Mark Weiser's name comes up. I just want to say something about him. Of course, many people know he brought us ubiquitous computing and basically was the director of CSL at PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center. He and his team basically thought through at least some interactions. I think this crowd, I don't have to explain what these are, but essentially he thought in the future you'll have 3 different computing experiences. One will be this little tab. You have your tab. It's basically an iPhone. You'll have a pad. I think we know we have pads now. And then we will have boards. Okay, fine. The boards are a little less worked out, but this is a picture of the lab, and you can see a lot of the folks sitting there. And I would claim this probably looks much like your home, where there's like little devices sitting around. You're maybe watching Netflix, so maybe you're not interacting with the screen, but it has this similar experience. For him to basically visualize this in like the late 80s, early 90s, well before people could understand what that was, is just phenomenal to envision something that far out, like 30-something years. It would be like if I said, let's vision what computing will be like in 2058. It's like very hard. That's what he was doing. That's like how far out it was. Now, he wrote about it. There's a whole separate debate about, we could talk about Mark for a long time. I just want to say he was asked to give the keynote talk at WIST in 1994. And this is his slide deck. And I pulled one of his slides here. This is this slide. And he didn't say, remember, he's the director of the computer science lab, and he wasn't saying, we got to work on network topologies, we got to look on screen kind of pixel density. He says, no, we need to start from arts and humanities. And he's telling you that this is going to be on the final exam. This is the most important part of the talk. Mark's a really interesting character. I've been spending time researching him. You can go to his archives down at Stanford, and it's phenomenal to go through archives. Like, just some interesting facts about him. First of all, he never got a bachelor's degree. He was basically a dropout. He even talks about it, like in his letters. He says, like, I myself was a college dropout. He's writing someone that was talking to him about college. He made a little graph of his whole history. And in fact, he was really wanted to be an existential philosopher. He didn't really want to do computer science. He did garbage collection as kind of his CS early on. It's a really interesting background. And in fact, when he writes about his autobiography, he talks about himself as an artist up front, that he wants to do philosophy. He doesn't really talk about the triumphs of the technical parts. Okay. I'm going to pivot a little bit to, hopefully that was me talking a lot about this dichotomy of art and engineering and science, but I'll talk about Berkeley for a little bit here because I do want to highlight some things going on. This is the Citrus Invention Lab, one of our first maker spaces. It's actually the first maker space in the whole UC system, I realized recently. About 12, 13 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And essentially, yeah, people move very fast there, as you can see. Here's some projects just to give you kind of like, there's many different projects that students work on. Things with prosthetics, things that's middle headwear was basically a Kickstarter that students made, and it was just amazing. You've probably seen these for sale, but that came out of the lab. Lioness is a really cool female-run startup that looks at basically female health, and they made these really smart, like a smart vibrator, very cool. From that is now spawned this really cool, beautiful building, the Jacobs Institute for Design Innovation. Please come visit. Basically, in this space, there is a larger maker space. It's a design studio. We teach graduate and undergraduate courses, and we try to have the intersection of all those things I just talked about, sort of engineering, science, art, philosophy, and so forth. There's huge exhibitions of things in this space, and it transforms, and lots of people are making and creating. So first of all, this very week, and basically for the next 2 days, if you happen to be in Berkeley or you venture over, there are showcases on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. You're watching this like online, and you're watching it later. Wait, what time is it at? Wait, you'll know. Noon to 5:30 both days. And then if you really want to package it, on the 20th of December, which is not this Friday, but next Friday, our Master of Design. So we have basically roughly about 50 students who are completing their master's degree. They will be showcasing, I believe, over 30 different projects. The whole building is taken over. It will be a spectacle. That's, I think, 4 to 7. Okay.
Say what day again?
On the 20th of December, that's Friday.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, so a ways off. Very cool to see. If you're like, I just don't know what to see, come see that, because that will be really a highlight.
Where do we go to? We go to the Jacob Center to find it online.
Yeah, so if you go to the Jacobs Institute, so if you just even Google Jacobs Berkeley, you can actually, if you go to design.berkeley.edu, you'll find information about the show, because that's our Master of Design program. A little bit more about some of the things that happen there. I teach a class called Critical Making. And in that class, it's a lot of kind of, like many things here, it's kind of why I like being at the other lab. It's full of this kind of hands-on making, and I've always been a fan of Saul and the things that he does with his team. Lots of hands-on prototyping and courses that are taught by amazing people like you and lots of graduates that are here. Here's just 2 different projects. These are like not from a master's program. These are just from Critical Making. This is a dress that kind of pushes back when people get close. It's about kind of pushing back on personal space. These are just kind of pretty small 2-week projects. Here's another one that's a dress that when you're touched in a way that you are not enjoying, then that kind of takes your picture and kind of captures you. And then another one was this idea of a toxic tie. So this listens to what's being said, and if it hears misogynistic language, the tie will slap you in the face. So really cool to prototype these things. They're really fun, and it starts a conversation. It's also the only time that I was like, in class, I'm going to say something misogynistic, but we're testing this because I have to see if it works. So we have to have a little thing. And this is my plug also. There's this fantastic master design program. Many people are here that are in it or have graduated. And so come to this program. It's a 3-year master's program. It's the only MDes in the entire UC system, more plugs. But you can apply now. Applications are due right at the first week of January. So, but please come to the showcase and you'll get a sense of what we do. This is just some of the courses and some of the makerspace. There's obviously 3D printers and robots, many things that you see here in the other lab. We're also interested in working with lots of different materials and different kinds of technologies. This is a project from last year, which was largely like a, kind of this clean the air. It was like a Roomba that moved around and sort of cleaned the air. Now, if you're interested in things like I'm standing here at the other lab and maker spaces and different kinds of universities that have these maker spaces, there's actually a group for that. There's this thing called the International Symposium of Academic Maker Spaces. Whoa. So that's a handful. It's basically universities like MIT, Olin, CMU, Georgia Tech, and onward. And what I'm telling you is, Sam, we are going to hold it in Berkeley next summer in August. So what you need to do is think about submitting cool projects, ideas, papers. They're due in early next year, and you can come and participate. It's a really cool, it's been going on almost a decade, so it's a very cool event. All right, let me see. How much time do I have? I want to talk about a little more research. Am I okay?
Your choice, yeah.
Okay, I don't want to take everyone's time here, but let me just, let me see what I've got here. I'll talk about wearables for just a little, and then I have some environmental things. All right, here's a very problematic photo of what the speculation of what wearables would be like. Many of you have probably seen this photo. Yes, we can critique it for problems with gender. There's so many problems with this photo, but I just want to say this was an early vision, and leave it at this is not what we have now. So what happened? And this is also some more pictures here. This one actually has Jennifer Healy in it, who's researcher. Brad Rhodes. Yeah, Brad Rhodes. A lot of people you probably recognize. But this was kind of the idea that we would move through and have these. Now, we do have a lot of technologies that have come along. Even recently, Meta's released some things. But an early thing was glass. Who's still wearing their glass? Who even bought glass? What happened with glass? So I actually talked to, this is Thad Starter, who was really part of that glass team. And he said, that was supposed to be a prototype. This was supposed to be almost kind of like a speculative design piece for us to explore. And I think some marketing people got a hold of it and said, let's make that into a full-on product. But I will say, these things take a long time to develop. Because do you recognize Thad here?
Absolutely.
You recognize Thad here? Do you recognize Thad here? Do you recognize Thad here? He's really been doing this a long time. And I don't want to critique glass and it's problematic, but a lot of times people think these technologies come up overnight or over 6 months. And so these are decades long passions that people have. I want to say something again. Whenever I work on research projects, this is wearables, I start to think about artists that do it. This was a electric dress. Basically really interesting electronics as a dress. It was you wore it. It had a lot of kind of issues around gender and had this kind of interactive kimono that was worn as a performative piece. Here's another artist, Stellark, kind of in the genre of Orland and Cindy Sherman and Lynn Hirschman and others that worked on the body and how the body can be physically transformed. So Stellark actually did a lot of things. He also created a third ear that you could talk into your ear. Stellark, I've interacted with him a lot. He came to my house and he hung out with my kids one night, and then they went to school, and then my kids told stories and freaked out everyone at school, and I had a call from the principal, and I had to produce this picture that in fact there was a person with a third ear and it was real. But back to research for a minute. So at the time, I wanted to do basically a bunch of projects that talked about things that weren't just glass screens that you were wearing. And one of them was to think about thermochromics and kind of non-emissive ways of expressing different textile changes and visual changes. And we thought maybe you'd change your style over the day. We kind of put on our clothing now and it looks the same roughly all day, unless you stain it or spill on it. But how could you kind of have it programmatically change? Who would change it? Would it change on context or time of day or your friends or lifestyle? There are a lot of kind of open discussions, and we explored this and wrote about it a lot. We also thought maybe you would capture things from the everyday world and put it onto your clothing. And this is what we did. This is kind of an e-ink based kind of concept where you could take a picture, in this case, had a texture, you would hold it up, it would transmit the data, and it would also power up the kind of e-ink, and that would be there. Folks that know it's a bistable material, so now it doesn't have to be powered. Of course, if you left your phone in your pocket, then it could power it. You can get little animations and things. Again, this is not the most like elegantly designed example, but the idea is we wanted to have some way of thinking about clothing that you could change and you could sort of express. We did it with fingernails as well. We tried to keep small devices you could tap and move and try to get it as small as possible. It was really based on, I know I'm going to date myself here with this reference, but this was basically Total Recall movie from the 1980s. But this was a scene where you could sort of imagine changing your nail color. We wanted to change like things on your nails that you could move and do, again, without power. And we did this with other things. This is just a fun, playful way to change a little appearance on your shoe, essentially. And although I do not have this, we explored hair. So a number of my students, really led by Christy Dirk, looked at hair. I think hair is just a lot of interesting properties. It's, first of all, it's very personal, but it's also very public. I mean, most of the time there are some cultures where it's not public, but most of the time it's you can visually see people's hair. It's immediately giving you an individual identity of how you look. It's also giving you possibly a group identity. Who do I belong to? You know, it's malleable. It has different length and style and color. It's expressive, and it often has some social bonding when there's like shared touching when it's permitted. And you also sometimes just play with your hair. There's like gestures and things. Again, I used to have a lot of hair. I don't have it now, but I sometimes wear a wig if I'm demoing this. That's a sight to see. But I'll give you an example of what we explored. So this is basically, you would have some capacitive touch that was in the hair, and that we could capture that and classify how you touched your hair. And then we could also express it either through a color change or through a motion change. So we could actually change the way your hair kind of expressed itself. Why would you want this? Well, if you get, say, a text message, normally someone says, "Where are you?" Well, the message would come in through your hair. You would feel it kind of move up. And then you need to reply, so you pull out your phone. No, you don't pull out your phone. You just send the message back through your hair. So by gesture through your hair, you can send the message back that you're on your way. And then, of course, you could have different style changes where the hair could sort of change a little bit, or it could change more dramatically, basically. There were a lot of different things that we did. This is just using pretty standard technology. We wanted to look at the kinds of interactions that would be there. And then you could have this really dramatic, this is not wires, you could actually get it to do this. Christy was a little of a performer, so she wanted to have a kind of performing version of it. So there's a lot more to explore with hair. We kind of left it at that. That's like a rich, deep culture, and I think there's a lot more left to do. I want to say something about skin as another form of wearable. And you'll see what I'm doing is I'm trying to walk through a bunch of different landscapes to create a vocabulary of different wearables, rather than I want to tell you about the latest smartwatch or Fitbit or something like that. So some of these, this is work by John Rogers. This is not by myself or my lab, and Anna Arias and others. But the idea is the skin is a great place to look for essentially health, well-being, expressiveness. What we did is we tried to look at being inspired by a lot of really cool work by others. This is across the board, folks at the Media Lab and CMU and elsewhere. But could you create a kind of low-cost way of interacting with this? I'll just play this larger version of this video. But using low-cost silk screening, we could create temporary tattoos that you could use as capacitive touch sensors. So now your skin becomes buttons. And also, we could use it as a strain gauge. We could use it as transmitting small electrical current, so you could even light up a little. You could play video games, and you could light up a little. This is a strain gauge version, and you could also have a little heartbeat kind of thing. Okay. Skip that.
Primrose allows me to refresh my look.
So this is, I'm just going to show you this. You might have seen this because it was a little bit of a viral thing.
Primrose
about
allows
a
me
year
to
ago.
refresh my look in a moment.
That is wild. I mean, come on, that's crazy.
What is happening right now?
So it's also responsive. Like if she moves, it'll kind of move and do things.
You show up, you have one
So that's like
outfit,
reflective
you can have
back
multiple different
polymer,
scene
this
change.
first
Red
crystal
carpets
that's
are
like
gonna
the
I
same
was about
way.
to say.
Like it's basically
Yeah.
non-emissive
You
again.
do
so
movie
it's just dealing with
premieres, different things.
reflective
Can you
properties.
imagine wearing, I mean, maybe not this
Pants, no
dress.
pants.
But do you recognize that person? There she is. So that's my student from when she worked with me, and she went off and did that work at Adobe Research after she left. So again, people continue to do just really great work, and it's just cool to see that kind of happen. All right, I'm coming to an end here. I apologize for going a little bit over. I'm going to say something about, we talked about maker spaces. We also looked at new ways of kind of having smart tools or tools that are kind of lucid and work with you. This is very true with some of the things that are going on with AI now. We want to use it as this creative tool, but we also want the human to lead. And in this case, we made tools that let you do beautiful wood joinery, but you basically would work with it like a hand tool. Like you just start working, it would watch what you're doing, and it would adapt and know what the right cut is to kind of match. And it would kind of, if you adapted, it would also adapt. They were networked, so a bunch of people could work on things together. And we also worked on these hybrid spaces of using kind of high and low tech. So a basic hand tool, but using a robot for precision. In this case, you could kind of have snap to grid. This is trying to get an idea of what would it be like if you had a tool that had this performative nature, that it could kind of remember, it could snap to grid, it could tell you exact measurements, and you could freeform move the tool around, make a drill, and then say, can you do 5 more at that same angle? And you kind of have a conversation with this. And so there was a whole idea of smart tools and technologies. Okay. So the last thing I want to just talk about is what this work that we're doing a lot now, which is thinking about new technologies that are really reflective of the planet. So this is actually, and have a kind of environmental and climate focus. This is the actual photo from 1972 that was taken from Apollo 17, a little over 52 or 3 years ago. And the idea was this photo started the entire kind of a huge movement around environmental justice and brought together. That's why we have Earth Day. People suddenly saw the planet as this very fragile ecosystem. So what we're trying to do is think through I'll say the thoughtful, poetic design of emerging interactive technologies that celebrate people and planet, leveraging novel materials that are both dynamic. This is the dynamism from what we started talking about, but also have some compostability, some sustainability. And again, really influenced from art. Gustav Metzger was an early artist that did autodestructive art, so kind of art that destroyed itself. And I'll just show you a short video of what we're talking about.
Gustav Metzger founded the autodestructive art movement that promoted destruction as a critical but less recognized form of artistic gesture. Metzger created public autodestructive art with acid, fire, and machines to foreground disintegration as a first-class artistic gesture. Numerous artists have explored this theme, such as Zhang Tangli's homage to New York, an elaborate kinetic sculpture that gyrated and collapsed.
So
Burning
this
Man.
earlier. Yeah.
In Shooting Picture, Nikki Desai-Fall took aim quite literally at her paintings, obliterating them in the process. More recently, Banksy's Girl with Balloon underwent a destructive transformation at auction when, Upon sale, it promptly destroyed itself as onlookers stood by in shock. But our creative tools only emphasize making. For example, today's three-dimensional modeling software offer us only limited atomic operations, such as extrude, revolve, sweep, and loft. We argue for a radical expansion to this vocabulary with a wide range of new unmaking atomic operations, such as crack, bulge,
So these are all things, this vocabulary you don't usually put into
Lean.
your making process, things that happen over time, something how it would basically fall apart or
pit,
start to have a patina, back to your reference from before.
split,
How might you embed that
and
into
others,
something
such as
that over
dissolve,
time it
shrink.
starts to have these other
sag,
properties that emerge?
and
But as a
shed.
designer, you can do this.
We have
So
augmented
we made
existing
this
3D software
basically some
to
software
enable
that did
and
this as a
empower
prototype, so you could
individuals
actually
to now
design these
interactively
things, and then
design
it would actually
and
output
visualize
models that
using this new
exhibited
unmaking vocabulary.
it, basically this
Our
property where
software
it
takes
looked
these
like
designs
what you would
and
design,
generates
but then the
models that can be
bulging we
3D
could get to
printed
occur
using a novel
through
process
different
that physically
multi-material
embodies the desired
properties,
unmaking.
usually through
Individuals
some
control not simply the
heat
atomic
kind
unmaking
of variation that we
but
that we
additional
use.
design parameters.
But you can
such
see
as
how
scale,
over time something might
magnitude, rate,
change or
and timing
change
of the
shape.
unmaking.
You,
as well
again,
as
you
factors
don't know
of
what's going to happen. It's
direction,
embedded at the
axis, and
time.
splitting.
It might happen or be triggered by some motion,
Unmaking
like leaning
promotes
something
designing
over
for reuse,
or tipping
since it
it.
enables
Again,
objects
we
to
don't
be
think of
created for
things
one
as I'm going to
application,
give you this
only
gift,
to
but
later
after
unmake
you
themselves
tip
into
it
a new
over
artifact
17
with an
times,
entirely
it will
new
fall
usage.
apart. Like
Unmaking
but I'm
forces
interested in that
individuals
as like
to
a
confront
design
product
concept.
lifetimes
That could
and
you embed
environmental
those things
issues
in
directly within their design process.
Now that whole idea of unmaking sort of has taken off. There's a Tokai journal on unmaking that they just published, and there's also been a number of workshops and I don't know, a dozen different conference papers at Kai and some other conferences. But for us, we pivoted back. This is some work that Catherine Song did with some others with me and folks from Accenture, where this was essentially, could you make interactive technologies that also decomposed? And this is a leaf heater. And the idea is that you, through a very kind of simple process, but it involves some kind of particular process steps, but everything here is biodegradable. We had leaves that we coated with chitosan, and then we basically dried them. We put them into like a nanowire, silver nanowire solution. The idea was to change and at least kind of optimize some of the electrical properties, but it's essentially a leaf. And we could pass a current through it through an inductive loop. We could do this. We could actually make our own coil. In this particular video, it's actually just a copper coil, which I understand, yes, it's not biodegradable, but there are ways to do it that are. But you could in this case, you could make a little package, and then you could use it through an inductive charge to heat it up, and you could place things in the package and heat them about 70 degrees Celsius. So you could almost get things to have some pasteurization. And I know it's like people are probably hungry because they're like, hey, when are the cookies coming out? But this is just a kind of simple example, but you could kind of heat it up, and then the package would have that interactive property, and mainly it's totally decomposable. You could then throw this package in its entirety, even though it had this electrical functionality, into the backyard, and it would decompose over time. And another project that we did was we needed to figure out how to do power. So what this is essentially a supercapacitor, and it's made out of largely edible products. It's not delicious, so don't eat this, but it is essentially, there's cheese and there's like charcoal powder and there's electric, so there's a gold foil. But it does, you can charge it and discharge it like it actually operates like a supercapacitor. So we've taken the things that you maybe recognize as what you would have in a normal capacitor, and we've replaced them with normal everyday products that are actually biodegradable. So you can also take this battery or the supercapacitor and you could throw it away into the just ground, and it'll decompose. The very last project is also about food, and there's a long history of people doing food in HCI. This was pretty recent work that, again, was done in the lab. I'll show you the video. I'm just going to talk over it. It's not as like super polished video, but you'll hopefully get the idea. So the idea is we want to create real food experiences and choreograph them and trigger them at very specific times. And what we did is we used something you're probably familiar with if you've ever had boba tea, these kind of essentially little edible pouches that don't rupture unless you basically chew down or bite down on them. And we wanted to control that using ultrasound. We also wanted to control how we made them. And so there's a specific, again, way that we used the alginate bath and water to create different size walls, and we wanted them to be of different properties so that we get them to rupture at specific times. So by controlling all those parameters, we could then put them into someone's mouth, and we could actually trigger a coffee taste or a juice taste or whatever. These are some tests outside of a mouth. I'm not going to go through the IRB fiasco to try to do this in real life, but I will tell you it actually works. This is just more of an example of how we can actually trigger it through an ultrasonic pulse to rupture it, so we can decide that we'd like you to have that food experience. We can also do smaller pulses and change the texture, the way it feels in your mouth, which is another cool kind of interaction. And then, of course, if one's got cranberry juice and one has coffee, we can trigger one and then the other. There's different ways to do that with different kinds of architectures, essentially. It looks really messy here, but what's cool is this was, I think, really, I like this as a really early exploration of what you can do with food as an interactive material in the mouth. And a lot of people have been looking at food, and this was just another example of that. And of course, you need to trigger it by putting something near your mouth, but phones and headsets and VR gear, lots of things are near your mouth. All right. I'm going to end there. We're doing more cool stuff with food and all kinds of other kinds of materials that are yet to come. But I will just end there and thank everybody that was involved. And again, thank you for hosting me, Ted, and others. So, yeah. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Eric. It's provocative and far-ranging. I think that the bringing art and philosophy in is fantastic. Just one of the other lab inventors here.
Thank you for hosting us.
It's time for us to open it up to questions and thoughts. And I've got a bunch, but I think we should start.
You can be tired and done, but okay.
Yeah. Who's got a thought? Well, I will say that there were many thoughts that came up for me. The food thing, I mean, texture, temperature, taste are so complex, and our tongue has more representation on the homunculus than any other thing on the body, except the thumb is pretty close, but not as good. And so it's a really rich area for interaction that people haven't, there have been some explorations, but it's a complicated one. And I think it's very exciting, this idea of doing some cooking and chemistry and so on in your mouth, which we do. I mean, you put a funny taste in your mouth, you put something else in to clean it out, or, you drink some water, whatever. But I think having it interact with the computer is very exciting. I think that was maybe a real highlight of your talk.
Okay, more food I'm hearing from. Didn't you have a project called Counterculture?
Counterintelligence is the name of it was really research project. We did all sorts of amazing stuff. Yeah, okay. Whole smart kitchen.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Hey, this is Edwin Lee. Just wanted to bring up the idea of history, putting a patina on an object or getting information from that patina of use, sparked a memory from ages ago now. This would have been grad school. Professor Jim Holland, Dr. Jim Holland, did a lot of work with history-enriched digital objects, just sort of building in information into the icon of something or in the representation of a text file that just showed maybe just in the case of the histogram, or in the case of the text file, it was sort of like a histogram of which sections of the text file have seen the most use or editing. And I haven't kept up with it, of course, but I've noticed, for instance, over the years that Trello, for instance, offers an augmentation whereby cards in its stacks can be like faded if they haven't been touched for a long time. that sort of like touches on some of that. And I don't know that you would be specifically interested in adding that sort of history to things, but that sort of was a fun spark for me.
Yeah, well, definitely this idea, like that was even in that camera. We had one version where if you didn't look at the pictures every so often, they would fade. So you had to recall them. It's this kind of urgency to look back and remember, or else maybe those things don't matter. I think Jim also, he did Beyond Being There, this really cool research, I think, which was like really inspirational. Yeah, that idea of, I had an obsession as a kid. I would look around my neighborhood and go, what have I not touched here? Like which rock, which like ledge, like, and so you think, what have we kind of touched around? And could you visualize that? That's an interesting kind of thought experiment.
Do you remember I made an electronic cigarette for RJR, which literally it was just an electronic thing that if you didn't suck on this tube every now and then, it would start buzzing and being happy. And if you pointed at another person that you'd met before, it'd sing happy songs, and all this kind of transforming itself based on its relationship to you and your relationship to other people, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, things that makes me think sometimes we have these technologies that just apply equally to everyone, but they don't have any real depth to them. They just serve some basic purpose, and that's good for a lot of things. But that idea, like maybe they have personalities, they demand your attention. There was a skateboard that was made, and someone did it in the lab, that was like, if it didn't get ridden, it would like start saying, hey, I'm just, come take me, my owner's not paying attention to me, like I don't want to hit him or her anymore, I want a new owner. And you could like, it would kind of advertise that. But it got us thinking about these partial ownership models. I certainly have shovels and rakes that I wish kind of advertise themselves like, hey neighbors, if you ever need these things, they're kind of available. So could technology help facilitate that sort of partial ownership model? We certainly have that now with like cars and scooters and things.
Sure. I mean, this cigarette, it was, cigarettes are, it's something to give another person. It's something to get from another person. It's something to, keep you focused. It's something to take a break with. It's something to define yourself with. And all of those things you can do with some interactive and patina changes that can be electronic, audio, visual, in various ways.
Yeah, and just one other thing back to your point was that I'm not like, I definitely appreciate patents. I think there's a really good place for them because they help give protection to people as they start to build their companies and things. But it's also sometimes they run amok, as you could imagine, and sometimes it just stifles innovation at the wrong time. So there's definitely a place for both of them, for sure.
So we have online, Erwin, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. You've developed all sorts of products and things from this idea of plasticity. What have you learned about the plasticity of ideas doing all this work?
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the things you can probably tell is that some of the projects, and sometimes I'll just put it as kind of HCI context, there's certainly, we're often taught these formal methods and the ways to actually perform the research, and it's valuable. I would say the plasticity comes from once you're kind of a practitioner with it. I'll see if you like agree with this, but that it's almost more interesting to try to bend the rules and change them and try to kind of collage together different methods or multiple methods, or just kind of import literature from places that other disciplines that you select. I mean, you're not saying I'm going to import all of philosophy, but the plasticity, I would say, comes from that flexibility and that malleability. It still has some form. It's not like a gaseous kind of cloud that's you can't hold on to, but it's always up to new interpretations of what the form is. I don't know if that makes any sense, or if that's a helpful answer for you.
Well, I would imagine that people get stuck when you say, "Oh, think of things you could do with food," and they go, "What?" How do you help them get over that when that happens?
Yeah, I mean, we are trying to do more stuff with food, and so I think for me, I think about, well, there's part of it is like, I don't want to create digital food. Like I'm interested in food still having substance and having some real properties, but what are things that, and you can tell in all these projects, they have elements that are also, they're just possibly quite problematic, but it's like, what if your food could change the way it felt in your mouth, or it could reform new shapes in your mouth, or it could like move on your plate or in your bowl and do things. And so part of it is an open curiosity, like how would that happen? What would that feel like? What would that look like? Of course, you're kind of answering you're asking another question, which is like, why would I ever want that? I'm enjoying my food. I don't want it to dance around and, spell out messages and things. And that's not the point. The point is to basically think through very new interactions, but also having some constraint on it, not just, let's go kind of wild with all food things. What are one or two small properties that if we can have some knob and control, then we can create some new expressive vocabulary with it. That's a little bit how I think about it. And so at least working with that, it's thinking through, I mean, that's the challenge that, we're having discussions now with a number of my students, like basically, how can we get food to move around, or can it interlock, or can it change shape, or can we have it respond to biting or crushing, or can it respond to other properties? Could it almost kick off like some signal? I mean, all these kinds of things we're trying to do. The lab looks a little bit more like a chemistry lab than a computer science lab. But that's like just one way that at least we've been thinking about food. I mean, there could be many other approaches, but I'm interested in that one. I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, thanks.
And on some level, many people, I remember the first time I had some chocolate that had Pop Rocks in it, and people love exploring the gastronomic chemistry, movement of about a decade ago in Catalina, especially. They spent just a tremendous amount of effort getting the textures and temperatures and nutritional aspects to be unusual enough that they were striking. And then, there's this restaurant in Chicago for a while. I don't know if it's still there, where you have to eat in the dark, absolute dark.
Oh yes, right. These things, right? It heightens your other kind of sensing. Yes, right. So again, it's like I'm thinking, would food be more performative or playful? I don't know if I even want that myself. I'll just say in full disclosure, but I love exploring those kinds of things.
I think it is.
And then we could stand in that awkward place and go, this is kind of a bad idea, but you know what? By standing here, I can see some other good ideas. Because if people don't go to the awkward position, then we're stuck in a local minima, and I can't stand that. So,
there are Korean barbecues where you do it on your table, and in Japan and other places where they have the animals performing as they die before you eat them. This stuff's, there's a long history of it, but bringing the computer and sensors and effectors into it, that there isn't a long history. That's exciting new stuff you're doing.
Well, a lot of new material exploration too.
Yeah. Well, is there another question over here somewhere?
They know me too well to ask a question. They already know.
Just a fun memory again.
Yeah.
As a person who had come to really enjoy boba teas, I had the fun experience of giving a friend his first boba tea. And he wasn't sort of really paying attention to the cup, what was in it. He just sort of sipped from the straw.
Oh, and then the strange
and just
texture,
to see that expression on his face, and he goes, "What the hell just went into my mouth?" and I feel that's sort of where some of this exploration goes, right? Like, and that's not before someone encounters boba teas, right? They don't.
Yeah,
they don't think about having these
we encounter
chewable
every
things.
day, like streets and sidewalks and cars, but then they're now embedded with electronics that are responsive. They express things about the environment and context or whatever. And again, we can argue if they're good or bad, but this is just another one saying we also have food. Is there a way that it can kind of be choreographed in some way. And of course, there's applications around health and children and eating and diet and medicine, but we're in early stages of, it's a very playful experience. So it's not as if this project is like, this is exactly the main problem that it will solve, but I know there's interesting interactions to kind of uncover. Yeah.
Well, with that, I think we will end the session. Please feel free to take a few minutes to talk to people afterwards. I appreciate the almost dozen people that have hung out the whole time here online, and I hope you got to make comments if you wanted to. And I get some clapping going on.
Oh yeah,
online.
thank you for that. Yeah,
And,
thank you all for coming, and thank you for the online folks, and also come early and often to Berkeley, come to the Jacobs Institute, and come to see the student showcase and other things. Stay tuned. There's lots of great things happening. And thank you, Other Lab and Ted and Berkeley.
And with that, we'll end this program for this month, and look forward to having a couple of very famous people in the next few months. We're choreographing who's going to be when, but Paul Sappel, for example, is going to be here, and other people. Thank you very much.
Yay.